The motion sensor chimed at exactly 3:42 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in late July, the kind of oppressive Houston heat that made asphalt shimmer and tempers flare. David Martinez, a 43-year-old petroleum engineer who worked from home 3 days a week, glanced at his phone and felt his jaw clench. There they were again, 3 kids, ages roughly 10 to 14, climbing over his 6-foot privacy fence like they owned the place. For 6 weeks now, ever since school let out for summer, this had been his reality. 6 weeks of coming outside to find wet footprints on his deck, empty juice boxes floating in his pool, and his expensive filtration system clogged with someone else's sunscreen. 6 weeks of being told by the non-emergency police line that this was a civil matter, unless he could prove who the kids belonged to. But today was different. Today, David had finally traced the route these kids took through the green belt behind his property. Today, he knew exactly which house they came from. And today, the exhausted engineer who just wanted to enjoy the pool he'd saved 3 years to install was done asking nicely. Before we dive into how David turned the tables on these entitled trespassers, if you love stories where patience runs out and people finally get the justice they deserve, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a reasonable man past his breaking point. The confrontation where careful preparation met shocked entitlement. And the resolution where consequences became unavoidable. The first part reveals the escalating pattern of disrespect that David endured, watching his property treated like a public amenity while his attempts at peaceful resolution were met with mockery and dismissal. You'll see how each incident stripped away another layer of his patience until the engineer in him demanded a systematic solution. The second part shows the moment David's trap finally closed. When documentation met confrontation and 3 cocky kids realized they'd been swimming in waters far deeper than they understood. The shock of having their names, addresses, and parents' information recited back to them. The dawning horror that their fun had been systematically cataloged. And the final part delivers the justice that was 6 weeks in the making. The work, the humiliation, the moment when parents who'd failed to supervise their children suddenly had to face exactly what those children had done. You'll witness consequences unfold in real time, with twists that even David didn't anticipate. Here's exactly how it happened. David Martinez had moved into the Creekside subdivision 18 months earlier, finally achieving a dream he'd held since childhood, a house with a real backyard and a pool. After growing up in a cramped apartment complex where summer meant fire hydrants and community centers, owning this 3-bedroom ranch with its pristine 20 by 40-foot saltwater pool felt like vindication for every sacrifice he'd made. The divorce had been expensive, wiping out most of his savings, but he'd rebuilt slowly and deliberately. He worked long hours, took on extra consulting projects, and lived frugally so he could afford this slice of peace. As a petroleum engineer specializing in offshore drilling systems, David's job demanded precision and documentation, skills that would prove invaluable in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He lived alone, spending weekdays analyzing complex data sets and weekends maintaining his property with meticulous care. The pool had cost $32,000 installed, and he treated it like the investment it was: balanced chemicals, regular cleaning, a state-of-the-art filtration system that kept the water crystal clear. The first incident happened on a sweltering Saturday in mid-June, 3 weeks after school let out. David had driven to Home Depot for landscaping supplies, gone for exactly 90 minutes, and returned to find wet footprints trailing across his deck. His pool gate, which he always kept locked, stood slightly ajar, not damaged, just unlocked. Confused, he checked the water and found it murky, the filtration system struggling against what looked like a massive influx of sunscreen and body oils. 3 empty Capri Sun pouches floated near the steps. His first thought was that neighborhood kids had somehow mistaken his yard for a friend's. It seemed impossible. His fence was clearly marked with his address, and the lock required a key. But what other explanation made sense? He fished out the trash, shocked the pool with extra chlorine, and assumed it was a one-time mistake made by kids who'd feel mortified if they realized what they'd done. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, it happened again. David had been on a conference call in his home office, noise-canceling headphones blocking out the world while he reviewed drilling data. When he finally stepped outside around 5 p.m. to check his automated pool cleaner, he found chaos. Not just wet footprints this time, but actual trash, chip bags, soda cans, a beach ball he'd never seen before, and someone's swim goggles left on his diving board. The gate wasn't just unlocked. It was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. His deck chairs had been rearranged, and one of his expensive outdoor cushions lay soaking in a puddle. This wasn't a mistake. This was brazen. David felt anger rise in his chest, the kind of controlled fury that came from realizing someone viewed his property as their personal playground. He spent that evening calculating costs, another $40 in chemicals to rebalance the water, potential damage to his filtration system, the principle of strangers invading his space while he worked mere feet away. That night, he installed a motion sensor camera above his back door, angled to capture the pool area. The third incident, 3 weeks into July, shattered any remaining patience David possessed. He'd been visiting his mother in San Antonio for the weekend, a rare 2-day trip to help her recover from knee surgery. He'd carefully locked everything, set his security system, and left on Friday morning. When he returned Sunday evening, exhausted from the 4-hour drive, he found devastation. His pool water had turned a sickly green, completely overwhelmed by contamination. Someone had apparently brought food. Pizza boxes and McDonald's bags floated alongside the debris. Worse, far worse, was what he found on his deck. Shattered glass from what looked like a dropped soda bottle, creating a dangerous hazard he'd have to painstakingly clean. And written in what he desperately hoped was just chalk on his concrete, "Best pool in the neighborhood," with a smiley face. The casual arrogance of that message, the complete absence of shame or awareness, made David's hands shake as he photographed everything. This wasn't kids making a mistake. This was kids who believed they had a right to his property, who felt entitled to take what they wanted because nobody had stopped them. He spent 3 hours that night cleaning, another $150 draining and refilling the pool partially, and made a decision that crystallized with absolute clarity. Enough. His first call went to the non-emergency police line Monday morning. The dispatcher listened with practiced patience before explaining what David already suspected. Without knowing who the kids were, officers couldn't do much. Trespassing required identifying the trespassers. They could increase patrols, but David's street was long and his backyard faced the greenbelt, not exactly high visibility. The officer suggested better locks, maybe a security company. David hung up feeling dismissed, his problem reduced to a suggestion to spend more money on defense. That afternoon, fueled by frustration, he did something he'd never done before. He walked the greenbelt behind his property, following what he assumed was the kids' route. Sure enough, about 100 yards through the wooded area, he found a well-worn path leading directly to his fence's back corner, where the wood met the metal post at just the right angle to provide climbing leverage. The next day, David did what any petroleum engineer would do. He gathered data. He reviewed his camera footage and found exactly what he needed. Clear shots of 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, arriving through his back gate multiple times over the past weeks. He took screenshots, enlarged the images, and began asking careful questions at the neighborhood pool that weekend. Within 3 days, he had names. Within a week, using his professional network and simple online searches, he had addresses, parents' names, Even the local middle school all three attended. The oldest boy was 14, the son of an attorney named Patricia Brennan who lived 4 streets over in the subdivision's nicer section. The younger boy, 12, belonged to the Tran family. His father worked in medical sales. The girl, 10, was the daughter of Marcus and Jennifer Wade, both teachers at the elementary school. David spent another week watching, documenting, building an airtight case with the same methodical precision he applied to offshore drilling analysis. If they wanted to play games with his property, he would show them what games really looked like when someone who specialized in complex problem-solving decided to solve one. David sat in his home office that Thursday afternoon, watching the camera feed on his phone with the focus of a man executing a carefully planned operation. At 3:38 p.m., the motion sensor chimed. He watched Kyle Brennan, 14, vault the fence first with practiced ease, followed immediately by 12-year-old Connor Tran and 10-year-old Madison Wade. They moved with the casual confidence of kids who'd done this dozens of times, already pulling off their shirts and kicking off their shoes before they'd fully cleared the gate. They had no idea David was home. His car sat in the garage, his house gave no indication of occupancy, and they'd clearly established a pattern around his supposed work schedule. But today, David had deliberately stayed off his usual conference calls. Today, he was waiting. He gave them exactly 4 minutes, enough time to get comfortable, to let their guard down completely, to start splashing around in his pool like they owned it. Then he opened his back door and stepped onto the deck. The change was instantaneous and beautiful. 3 heads whipped around in synchronized shock, 3 sets of eyes widening as they registered his presence. David stood there in his work clothes, button-down shirt and slacks, and smiled the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Kyle Brennan, Connor Tran, Madison Wade," he said calmly, pitching his voice to carry clearly over the water. "I think it's time we had a conversation." The panic that flashed across their faces was visceral. Kyle, the oldest, tried to recover first. You don't know who we are." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his fear. Connor was already swimming toward the ladder, looking for escape routes. Madison, the youngest, just froze in the shallow end, her eyes darting between David and the fence they'd climbed. "Oh, but I do," David continued, pulling out his phone and scrolling through his carefully organized notes. "Kyle Marcus Brennan, 14 years old, son of Patricia and Robert Brennan, 847 Maple Ridge Court. You attend Creekside Middle School, play on the soccer team, and based on your mother's LinkedIn profile, she's a partner at Henderson. Wade and Associates downtown, family law, ironically. Your father works in commercial real estate." He watched Kyle's face go pale. "Connor Tran, 12. Parents are David and Lisa Tran at 623 Oakmont Drive. Your dad works for Stryker Medical Sales, makes pretty good money from what I understand. You're in 7th grade on the honor roll, actually. Good for you." Connor had stopped swimming, treading water now with his mouth hanging open. And Madison Wade, 10 years old, daughter of Marcus and Jennifer Wade, both 5th grade teachers at Riverside Elementary, living at 512 Sycamore Lane. You just finished 4th grade. He looked up from his phone. "Did I miss anything?" David could see them processing this, the calculations happening behind their frightened eyes. How did he know all this? How long had he known? What else did he know? The engineer in him appreciated the systematic destruction of their confidence. Each detail he revealed stripped away another layer of their bravado, reducing them from cocky trespassers to terrified children who'd vastly underestimated the man they'd been stealing from. "I'm a petroleum engineer," David explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "My job involves analyzing complex problems, identifying patterns, and documenting everything with absolute precision. You 3 have been trespassing on my property for 6 weeks. I have you on camera 17 separate times. I have time-stamped footage, clear facial recognition, and a detailed log of every incident, including the property damage you've caused. He held up his phone, showing them a video of themselves climbing his fence just 3 days earlier. I know the exact route you take through the Greenbelt. I know you usually come between 3:30 and 4 p.m. on weekdays. I know Kyle jimmied my gate lock with what looks like a bent paperclip. Impressive, actually, but also felony breaking and entering when combined with trespassing. The silence was deafening. Even the pool seemed to have stopped moving, the water settling into an eerie calm. David let that silence stretch, let them marinate in the reality of their situation. Then he laid out their options with the clarity of someone presenting a drilling proposal to executives. Here's what's going to happen. You have 2 choices. Option 1, I call your parents right now, and yes, I have all their numbers, and I also contact the police with my documentation. Kyle, at 14, you're old enough to face juvenile charges for criminal trespassing, breaking and entering, and property damage. Those are real charges with real consequences. Connor, Madison, you're young enough that you'd probably just get community service, but it goes on your record. Your parents get to deal with lawyers, court dates, and civil liability for the $800 in damages you've caused to my pool system, plus the cost of all the chemicals and cleaning I've had to do. He watched their faces crumble, particularly Kyle's, who was clearly doing the math on what criminal charges would mean for his future. I also post this footage to the neighborhood Facebook group, the HOA page, and probably TikTok, because why not? You become the entitled kids who destroyed a man's property all summer. That follows you. Your parents' friends see it. Your teachers see it. Everyone knows. He paused, letting option 1 sink in with its full weight of consequences. Then he softened his voice slightly, offering what sounded like mercy but was actually just a different form of punishment. Or option 2, you make this right. Tomorrow, Friday, you 3 are going to show up here at 8 a.m. sharp. You're going to spend the entire day cleaning this pool, this deck, this entire backyard area until it's absolutely spotless. You're going to scrub the tile, vacuum the pool, clean the filters, organize the deck furniture, pull weeds from the landscaping, everything. You're going to work under my supervision, and you're going to do it right. Saturday, you're coming back and doing it again, 8 hours both days. Your parents are going to write me a check for $800 to cover the damage you've caused. And you're going to write me individual letters of apology that demonstrate you actually understand what you did wrong, not just generic sorry nonsense. David pulled out a folder he'd prepared, containing printed screenshots of their faces from his security footage, time-stamped and dated. I have all the evidence I need to pursue option 1 whenever I want. This isn't a negotiation where you get to bargain or make counteroffers. These are your only choices. Face full legal and social consequences, or spend your weekend making amends and hope I'm satisfied enough not to press charges anyway. He looked at each of them in turn. You have 30 seconds to decide. After that, I start making phone calls. Kyle found his voice first, though it came out small and defeated. We'll do the work. We'll do whatever you want. Just please don't call our parents. The plea in his voice was almost painful. David shook his head slowly. Oh, your parents are getting called regardless. But if you choose option 2, I'm calling them to tell them you'll be here tomorrow morning for community service. If you choose option 1, I'm calling them to tell them to expect police contact. Either way, they're finding out what you've been doing all summer. Madison started crying then, quiet sobs that she tried to muffle with her hand. Connor looked like he might throw up. Kyle just stared at David with the expression of someone watching their comfortable world collapse. We'll do the work, Kyle repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Please, we'll do whatever you say. David nodded curtly. 8 a.m. tomorrow. If you're even 1 minute late, I proceed with option 1 immediately. Now get out of my pool and go home. And Kyle, leave through the front gate like a normal person. I'm watching you all the way out. He watched them scramble from the water, grabbing their belongings with shaking hands, and file past him through the side gate he unlocked. They didn't look back, didn't speak to each other, just disappeared around his house like ghosts fleeing daylight. David stood on his deck for a long... Friday morning arrived with typical Houston humidity, the kind that made 8 a.m. feel like noon. David was on his deck at 7:45, coffee in hand. When Kyle appeared first at 7:52 a.m., followed by Connor at 7:55, and finally Madison at 7:58, all cutting it close enough to show they'd seriously considered his deadline. They looked exhausted already, and David suspected none of them had slept well. Good. Behind Madison came an unexpected addition. Patricia Brennan, Kyle's mother, dressed in expensive casual wear that screamed attorney even on a Friday morning. She had the sharp-eyed look of someone used to winning arguments. "Mr. Martinez?" she called out, her voice carrying that edge of professional authority people developed in courtrooms. "I'm Patricia Brennan. I think we need to discuss what you're accusing my son of." David had been waiting for this. He gestured to his patio table where he'd laid out his evidence folder. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm documenting facts. Would you like to see the 17 separate instances I have of your son and his friends trespassing on my property?" He opened the folder, revealing pristine printouts of time-stamped screenshots. "This is June 18th at 3:43 p.m. This is June 22nd at 4:15 p.m. This is July 2nd, actually 3 different times that day. Your son is clearly identifiable in each image." Patricia's professional mask flickered as she examined the evidence. David saw the moment she realized she had no legal ground to stand on. The subtle deflation of someone who'd come prepared to intimidate and found themselves outmaneuvered instead. "Why didn't you contact us sooner?" She tried shifting tactics. "I attempted to resolve this through proper channels," David replied calmly. "The police told me it was a civil matter. I didn't have identities until recently, and the moment I confirmed them, I addressed the issue directly with the individuals responsible. Your son made a choice yesterday: work off his debt or face criminal charges. He chose work. I'm holding him to that choice." Before Patricia could respond, a silver sedan pulled up, and David recognized Lisa Tran from his research. Then another car, the Wades, arriving together. Within 10 minutes, all 3 sets of parents stood on his deck, their children clustered together looking miserable. David had prepared for this too. He calmly walked each parent through his evidence, showed them the damage costs, explained the 6 weeks of escalating trespassing. He watched the horror dawn on their faces as they realized what their children had been doing all summer while they'd been at work. Jennifer Wade, Madison's mother, was visibly shaking. "Madison, is this true? You've been breaking into this man's pool?" Her daughter's tears were answer enough. Marcus Wade looked at David with genuine remorse. "Sir, we had no idea. We'll pay for everything. Just tell us what you need." But it was Patricia Brennan's reaction that surprised David most. After reviewing every piece of evidence with her attorney's eye, she turned to Kyle with an expression of profound disappointment. "You've been doing this for 6 weeks. Breaking and entering? You could have been arrested. You could have a criminal record." She looked back at David. "Mr. Martinez is being remarkably generous, offering you a chance to make this right. You're going to work every minute he requires, and you're going to learn exactly what consequences feel like." David had them sign a brief liability waiver. His engineering background made him cautious about injury claims, and then handed each kid a task list he'd prepared. Kyle got pool cleaning duty, scrubbing tiles, vacuuming, cleaning filters. Connor got deck and fence washing. Madison, being youngest, got the lighter task of weeding flower beds and organizing pool supplies. Their parents stayed for the first hour, watching their children work in the steadily climbing heat, before gradually departing for their Friday plans with promises to return at 5 p.m. The day unfolded exactly as David had orchestrated. The kids worked and worked hard, driven partly by guilt and partly by fear of what option one would mean. Around noon, Kyle tried to cut corners on the tile scrubbing, and David made him redo the entire section. Not good enough. People who use things without permission don't get to do half the work. Connor was more diligent, perhaps because his parents had been the most visibly disappointed. Madison worked quietly, tears occasionally streaking her dusty face, clearly the most affected by the shame of being caught. The twist came at 2 p.m. when David went inside for water and returned to find Kyle attempting to take a photo of David's backyard with his phone. "What are you doing?" David demanded. Kyle jumped, nearly dropping his phone. "Nothing, just my friends wanted to see where we were working." David held out his hand. "Phone, now!" Reluctantly, Kyle handed it over. David scrolled through recent messages and found exactly what he suspected. Kyle had been texting friends about the psycho neighbor and planning to post evidence of David supposedly overreacting. The messages revealed what Kyle really thought, that he was the victim here, that David was unreasonable, that this was all blown out of proportion. "Connor, Madison, come here," David called out. When all three kids stood before him, sweaty and exhausted, he showed them Kyle's messages. "This is what I'm talking about." "You still don't get it. You think I'm the bad guy because I'm making you face consequences." He looked at Kyle directly. "You broke into my property 17 times. You caused hundreds of dollars in damage. You treated something I worked years to afford like your personal playground. And you think I'm the psycho?" The other parents had given David their numbers. He called Patricia Brennan immediately, explained what he'd found, and added a new condition. Kyle would be coming back for a third day on Sunday, and he'd be writing an additional essay about why respecting other people's property matters. Patricia didn't argue. In fact, her response was harsh enough that David almost felt bad for Kyle. "He'll be there Sunday at 7 a.m., and he'll be bringing a 5-page essay typed and double-spaced. By 5 p.m., when parents returned, the transformation was visible. The pool gleamed. The deck looked better than when David had moved in, and 3 utterly exhausted kids sat in his lawn chairs drinking the water he'd provided. They'd worked 8 hours in Houston heat, and it showed. David inspected everything with the same precision he brought to engineering reports, finding only minor issues that he noted for Saturday's work. Saturday followed the same pattern, though with noticeably less resistance. The kids arrived on time, worked without complaint, and showed the first signs of genuine understanding. Connor, the middle child, approached David during lunch break. "Mr. Martinez, I'm really sorry. Actually sorry. I knew it was wrong, but Kyle kept saying it was fine, and I should have said no." His remorse seemed genuine, the kind that comes from a full day of physical labor providing time to think. Madison barely spoke all weekend, but her careful attention to every task suggested the lesson was landing. Kyle remained sullen, but David had expected that. 14-year-olds rarely handled public humiliation gracefully. Sunday morning, Kyle arrived with his essay, and David read it while the boy worked. It was surprisingly thoughtful, discussing property rights, trust, and how his actions had impacted someone who'd done nothing to deserve it. Perhaps Patricia had helped edit it, but the core sentiment seemed authentically Kyle's. By Sunday afternoon, the job was complete. The 3 parents arrived together at 4 p.m. with a check for $800, split 3 ways, and something else David hadn't expected: gift cards totaling another $200 to cover his time and stress. "It's the least we can do," Marcus Wade said. "You could have had our..." David gathered the 3 kids one final time on his deck. They stood before him, sunburned and sore, but different somehow from the cocky trespassers he'd confronted Thursday afternoon. "You made my life miserable for 6 weeks, he said quietly. "You laughed at my property, my hard work, my right to privacy. You treated police dismissiveness as permission. And when I asked you to stop, yes, I left a note on my gate after the first incident that you all clearly ignored. You mocked it and came back worse." He paused, making eye contact with each of them. "But now you understand that actions have consequences, that other people's property isn't yours to take, that someone being nice enough to not immediately press charges doesn't make them weak. It makes them merciful. And mercy isn't something you should test." He looked at Kyle specifically. "You're going to Creekside Middle in the fall. You'll be surrounded by people who didn't spend their summer learning what I taught you. Some of them will think it's fun to mess with people's stuff, to take things that don't belong to them. You're going to remember these 3 days before you decide to join them." He softened slightly. "You're not bad kids. You made bad choices because nobody stopped you. Now someone has. Don't waste the lesson." The parents thanked him again, herding their chastened children toward cars. As they pulled away, Patricia Brennan rolled down her window. "Mr. Martinez, Kyle's grounded for the rest of summer, no phone, no friends over. But I wanted you to know. He'll remember this. They all will." She gave him a lawyer's appraising look. "You would have won in court, you know. The evidence was airtight." "I know," David replied, "but court wouldn't have taught them anything except that adults fight with paperwork. This way they learned the actual lesson." He watched her drive off, then returned to his backyard, his property, now restored and respected. 2 months later, on a mild September evening, David floated on an inner tube in his crystal-clear pool, a beer within arm's reach and jazz playing softly from his outdoor speakers. School had started, the weather had cooled fractionally, and, most importantly, his motion sensors hadn't detected a single unauthorized visitor since July. The kids had kept their distance, which David appreciated. He hadn't seen them around the neighborhood, but he'd heard through community channels that all three had become notably more respectful of others' property. Connor had apparently stopped, his friends from cutting through someone's yard, citing his summer experience. His friend Rachel, a teacher he'd met at the neighborhood pool, floated nearby on her own tube. "You ever regret not pressing charges?" she asked. "I mean, they did violate your property for weeks." David considered this, watching the sunset paint his fence in orange and gold. "Sometimes I think about it," he admitted. "But those kids learned more from 3 days of hard work than they would have from court dates and lawyers. Kyle's still a punk, but he's a punk who knows what consequences means now. That's worth something." "You're more forgiving than I'd be," Rachel laughed. "Not forgiving," David corrected. "Practical. Court would have cost me time and money. This way I got my pool cleaned, my deck restored, and $1,000 in compensation plus the satisfaction of watching entitled kids learn that the world doesn't revolve around them." He took a sip of his beer, savoring both the drink and the peace. Justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to document everything and refuse to be a victim. As the stars emerged overhead and the city lights twinkled in the distance, David smiled genuinely for the first time since this whole situation began. His pool was his again, his property respected, his boundaries clear. And somewhere across the neighborhood, 3 kids were heading into high school and middle school with a lesson about consequences that most people never learned until it was too late. Justice, served hot or cold, poolside or courtroom, was equally satisfying. But this version, the one where teaching replaced punishment, where accountability replaced arrest, felt like the kind of justice that might actually stick. Across the eye, country in Portland, Oregon, retired Army logistics officer Colonel Sarah Chen was examining her raised garden beds when her HOA president demanded she remove them for aesthetic violations. Sarah smiled, the same calm smile she'd worn when coordinating supply chains in combat zones, and pulled out the original property covenants she'd researched before buying. "These beds are 18 inches below the restricted height," she said pleasantly, "and made from approved materials. But please, keep trying to enforce rules that don't exist. I'd love to examine the HOA's entire enforcement history at the next board meeting." The president's face went pale as he realized he'd just challenged someone who'd built a career on regulatory compliance and documentation.